Hace algunos años, por primera vez, había una esperanza de democracia.
Mr. Ambassador, for us this is a period of change. The idea is to convert our country from a semi-colonial dependent nation into a Guatemala that is free and independent. The goal behind all these reforms is to create a modern, economically viable society. But to raise the standard of living for the most people possible, we can't continue to simply give away every resource that we have.
Mr. President, I don't have to tell you there's a lot of alarm in Washington about all the goings-on down here. And there's not exactly too much time to fool around.
Mr. Ambassador, allow me to speak freely. The problem between our nations is united fruit.
Imagine if in your country there was a foreign corporation that owned all the finest land. Then imagine that the means of getting your products to market, the ships, the ports, the railroads, were all owned by the same company. Not only do they own your entire economic infrastructure, but in 50 years, they have paid virtually no taxes.
Look, the government of the United States is not going to permit a red Soviet republic between Texas and the Panama Canal.
Oh, Mr. Ambassador, I am certain that when you have been here longer and have had an opportunity to get to know our country, you will feel differently about all this.
No matter how long I'm here, nothing's going to make me a communist. And I can tell you something else. That line doesn't have much appeal for the American people either. You clean those Reds out of your government, when United Fruit gets what is properly theirs, maybe then we'll talk about bettering relations. I'm afraid time is getting very short.
Hemos dicho basta de tanto dolor. Nos hemos organizado en pequeñas cooperativas, comunidades cristianas de bases. Practicamos en nuestra vida diaria el mensaje de la Biblia. Hemos recorrido tantos caminos y no hemos tenido respuesta.
Right, sure. I'll get back to you on that.
Colonel Costello, I'd like you to meet Colonel Al Haney of Central Intelligence. He'll be your coordinator from now on.
Pleased to meet you, Colonel. Have a seat.
Thank you. This is all very impressive.
Yeah. The agency has asked me to confirm the details of our arrangements. Now, as you know, we're working on this thing called a Movement for National Liberation. And we'd like you to be the chief.
Peace comes to Guatemala. For the first time in 10 years, the people of Guatemala are breathing the sweet air of liberty. Only days after the resignation of Red President Arbenz, rebel leader Castillo Armas sweeps into town. Thousands of communists and fellow travelers are rounded up in makeshift prisons. For United Fruit, it's business as usual, as all company land seized by the communists is returned. On television, Secretary of State Dulles announces the return of democracy to Guatemala.
The future of Guatemala lies at the disposal of the Guatemalan people themselves. It lies also at the disposal of leaders loyal to Guatemala who have not treasonably become the agents of an alien despotism which sought to use Guatemala for its own evil ends. The events of recent months and days add a new and glorious chapter to the already great tradition of the American states.
hace ya 3 días mis unidades.
For 3 days, my men have surrounded this town so that the people can feel secure and vote freely.
Para que el ciudadano se sienta tranquilo y pueda votar libremente.
Ninguno debe de traer saco, ninguno debe de traer morral, ninguno debe traer sábanas envueltas, nadie, nadie.
Si una persona no vota,
if someone doesn't vote, that person is punished by a fine.
Es castigada con una multa. Esto es para asegurar que
This ensures that everyone votes.
La ciudadanía ejerza su voto.
The workers and the suffering of those workers in the southern coast provided incredible wealth for the land oligarchy in Guatemala. The same thing was happening in the cities. The working conditions were terrible and the wages were incredibly low. So you had the same level of suffering among all the people of Guatemala. You're speaking about a country that has a majority Indian population. And it is the unity of that Indian population with the non-Indians, the unity of the workers with the peasants, that allowed the mass movement to grow. So what you have from the early 70s is a mass movement that's growing in the cities and in the countryside simultaneously. It is growing at different levels and different degrees, but it's there in both places. One group of mine workers in the highlands decided to draw national attention to their case by marching publicly to Guatemala City. The march took them a week through the Pan American Highway, and during all that week there was hundreds of Indian peasants, women, children, men, coming down from the mountains to share their food and their support with them. They also went into towns where workers, teachers, students came out also supporting them.